This podcast was created to educate listeners on the experiences of diverse individuals. However, all opinions expressed by the host or guests do not reflect the overall standing of Tarleton Radio or Tarleton State University.
Hello everyone, welcome to Making Space, a Diversity Dialogue. I'm your host, Cole. This is a biweekly podcast where together we'll have questions answered about socially sensitive topics while learning how to create lasting relationships with diverse people. As most of you know, at the time of this recording, the United States is experiencing an incredible amount of social movement and adversity among civilians and law enforcement officers. As of May 25th of this year, George Floyd, an African-American man, was killed during an arrest by Minneapolis police. He was suspected of using a counterfeit bill at a local convenience shop, although later the bill was proved genuine. He did die due to tactics used by the apprehending officers. Though not the first African-American life lost by such law enforcement measures, due to bystander video and accessibility of mass media tools like social media, this incident spread through the nation and through the world and sparked a time of civil unrest among citizens of every race. Now, protests in Minneapolis did begin the following day and then spread through the entire United States as of May 27th, hitting bigger cities like Dallas and even smaller towns like Stephenville, Texas. That brings us to our special guests today, all three of which spoke and participated in the Stephenville, Texas protest. Our first guest is Alex Jimenez, who organized the protest here and is currently a doctoral student at Marquette University Law School. Thank you for coming on, Alex, and congratulations on that. And then Dr. Reggie Hall is our next guest. Oh, yes. Sorry about the audio delay, listeners. We are doing a Zoom call, as you may know. Dr. Reggie Hall is our next guest, who is an associate professor and department head with the College of Business Administration at Tarleton State University. And then Savion Washington, a formal athletic administration and coaching major at Tarleton State University. He is also a local business owner and founder of SW Fitness. Thank you guys so much for coming on. I'm glad to hear you guys. Go ahead and say hi to the listeners.
How are y'all?
What's
up, guys? Thanks,
so
Cole, for having us on as well.
I am so excited to get into this podcast and really get into the interview portion. But I do want to tell the listeners first off that our main goal for the podcast today is to hash out what systematic racism is and how it manifests in the United States, as well as talk about you guys and your experiences with protests, as well as just your experiences in general. While I don't have very much vocabulary for this episode, I do want to let people know that we did have a previous episode of Making Space where we discussed a lot of the history and a lot of vocabulary related to police brutality in the Black community. So if you haven't listened to that one, I do recommend it. It has some testimony about growing up in the Black community as well as the history of law enforcement there. I did want to define racism really quick though, via Merriam-Webster as the definition they have recently changed. Racism is a belief that race is a primary determinant of human traits and capabilities, that race differentiates inherent superiority or of a particular race. Now, I feel like that's a lot of words to just say generally. If you feel as if your race is better than others, that is inherently racist. What do you guys think about that? How would you define racism? Anyone can take that.
Yeah, I can do it. So there's a lot of different forms of racism.
Definitely.
Kind of like you were saying, it's just like having people in a more favorable position than others, based on their race, I guess. So there's like systemic racism, which is the racism in your quote unquote system. So if you think of it like in our country, the United States, it would be like the laws and policies that have been set up that favor the dominant culture over others, like people of color.
Right.
And then there's just the other,
There's things
guy
like
you see
overt
walking.
racism, right?
Yeah, like overt racism is something like you're just walking down the street and like someone just shouts like a slur at you or something like that, or he
Right.
thinks he's better than you just because you're brown or black and he's white, something like that.
Right, exactly. Overt is definitely more, unfortunately, can be very unapologetically so. It's usually very apparent. Did anyone else want to talk about that, or do we want to move on to more questions?
I'll go ahead, Cole. So for me, I think systematic, or however you pronounce it, I think it's more like I like the youth. I like the younger generation. I always think about like schools. Go to like the lower community or like the poverty schools, so to say. I grew up in areas like that. And you don't even put enough money into the schools to even like to have the kid around like knowledgeable people that are positive. Right? You're just around negative. They do. I think let's just say the black community. I think they struggle more with like racism just because they have nothing. Right? All they do is like they're just survival of the fittest. Like you have to rob to survive. You have to steal money from your mom. It's all like you have to sag. And I say you have to. It's just the way they brought it up. That's the way they came up, and that's your product of your environment and stuff like that. So
exactly,
I think,
it's the social norms, right? That you're set at from a very young age. You're just brought up into that.
Yeah, we could tackle this whole idea of systematic racism and overt racism throughout the entire podcast, and I'm sure that's kind of, you wanted to target that, and so we won't focus too much. But yes, as Savion described it, you look at the school systems, or as Alex mentioned, you looked at any of our legal systems, and you see that the racism existed so long ago because of the privilege and who made those rules. And we look at our school systems and our school bases, and obviously our schools are tax-based, based upon the representation, the economic factors that coincide in that particular area, that city. And so you see those that tend to be, it's not necessarily intentional, and maybe it is intentional, but it creates an unintentional impact, which is systematic racism in my but it is still racism nevertheless. And so it just creates some barriers for advancement for people of color. And again, so, like I said, some of it we never know oftentimes, and that's the confusion, because it becomes uncomfortable talking about the impact. I'm reading a book or listen audio book, and I finished it, and I'm going to read it again. It was Robin DiAngelo with White Fragility, and she talked about looking at intention and versus impact, or actually the other way. She was just discussing those two words of when we talk about racism, intention and impact, and I thought those were powerful words. And so
yeah, I think we see, at least I feel like a lot of my listeners will probably see it as they don't realize what things are happening, or just that they don't realize what the effect will be if they make a certain decision, or if they say a certain thing, or if they set about policies a certain way. And I think it goes back to having representation for every type of person and trying to put yourself in each other's shoes. Definitely.
Absolutely.
All right, let's go into my questions a little bit, since we discussed that. Why did you guys decide to organize a protest here in Stephenville? I'm not sure who exactly. I'm sure Alex was probably like the head of that. Of course, you organized it mostly. But what made you guys decide to do a protest here?
I think just growing up here, the experiences I had, we didn't have a whole lot of Black kids in our high school and growing up, but the few that were in school, I was really good friends with them, and just like the experiences that they would tell me that they had, the experiences that I had, even though I'm not Black, really just kind of, it always kind of bothered me. And I've always kind of been a little bit more outspoken, I guess. So I was like, this is something that goes on in Stephenville that is a pretty big problem. Right. I think both of the guys here will attest to that. And it's just, I wanted to do something about it. So I just created it on a whim, and it really just blew up. Never thought that it would be as big as it got, but thank goodness it did, and thank goodness it's been overwhelmingly positive. So
of course, I know when I first heard about you guys putting on the protests, I immediately my significant other was like, yes, we have to go, and I'm like, okay, yes, we'll go. And I wasn't, unfortunately, as it is Stephenville, I wasn't expecting such a large group, but I am so happy that it ended up being such a large group. So that's really amazing. Did anyone else want to comment on that before we move on, or what did y'all feel like?
So I was so excited but scared when Alex texted me. I think it was 2 nights before. I didn't even know who he was. I knew his parents, but I never met him. I was like, wait. I looked at my wife. I was like, wait, somebody's trying to set something up. They want me to be a part of it. What do I do? And then my wife she's actually white, so it's Reggie's wife and stuff like that. But like, you gotta do it. Do it. I was like, man, it's easy for you to say that, huh? Like, I tell everybody, like every single day, everybody talk about the protest or whatever. I tell them that Alex, the youngest kid that did it, he's the most bravest person in this town. Like, I would have been. I'm on record saying, like, I would be too scared to do something like that. Like, I'm scared of the backlash, like, definitely. A lot of our culture, right, we hold it in. Like, we think a lot of stuff, but we still got to protect and take care of our family, right? We can only do so much. But Alex, I appreciate you, my guy.
Yeah, congratulations on your success, guys. Seriously.
No doubt. He did a great job initiating, and just I think he contacted Jake Freed, who contacted me to ask me to get involved, and I spent a lot of time trying to debate, should I be involved? I know I needed to be involved, but you also have this struggle to balance between being a Tarleton professor, also being a parent, being responsible, but you also have to be a responsible citizen as well. And so it was a great opportunity for Stephenville, and I know it was a great opportunity for me, because it as much as it impacted everyone else, it impacted us as well, to have a platform to be able to speak out and speak openly, because there is a lot of caution. We talk about this systemic racism. There's a caution even for a Black man to talk about the way when there's talk about how we feel about these things, especially when there's no, what I call, a critical mass of African Americans in this community with any influence or power. It's very small in that regard. So I appreciate what Alex did, and I think it was not just good for Alex and for Savion and myself, but for Cole and her husband, or significant other, or who and also so many more people in this particular community. Period. So.
Definitely, I don't think many people realize how scary it can be to do something like that, especially if you're not part of a minority group. Like it can be terrifying.
Night before, I'm calling Reggie, I'm texting Alex, I'm texting the police, like, man, like, is this it?
That's my last night.
This last night.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
I know.
It was terrifying. I was so scared.
Definitely.
I was so scared, but thank goodness it went well.
Sure.
Yes, and peaceful.
Yes.
Right. Definitely. To be honest, we were prepping for the worst, because of course all you see on the media right now, unfortunately, is how bad it can go. A lot of the violence associated with it, but it's something that needs to be heard, and I'm glad it was heard here, definitely. All right. What was your experience with law enforcement? I know you mentioned some in the Facebook event that it went well, but why don't you go ahead and tell podcast listeners how you worked with law enforcement with the protest?
So I created the Facebook page like Sunday afternoon, and I guess they got wind of it, like the police department, and they reached out to me Sunday night. And I was like, oh crap,
no.
What did I get myself into? And I'm not gonna lie, I had my doubts, and I was pretty hesitant, but I wanted a bunch of people to come with me just to like kind of bridge the gap, and I knew that these two guys are very well respected in the community, as they should be, and I was like, I wonder if they'd like to be a part of it. So thank goodness they joined me. And I mean, it really like opened my eyes that first meeting, because the police officers were like so genuine and understanding, it seemed like. And they are, not that it seemed like, but they were, like, in my opinion, like they were just friendly, understanding. They supported us, and they like agreed with us too, which
That's
meant
amazing.
a lot. And just building that relationship with them, you know, because I know, not just from the media, but you know, a situation here or there that I've had, you know, it kind of builds that distrust between
It does.
me and law enforcement. And now, like, I feel way more comfortable because I know that those guys that we've been speaking to and meeting with, you know, they have my back. So that it's meant a lot to me.
Yes, that is really, really amazing. And I'm glad they were behind y'all. How did y'all feel with the police presence there? Were you trustful, or was there still hesitation?
I think after having that conversation with the chief of police and his crew, I think there was 3 other individuals there present, and they were so positive that I felt confident that they were there protecting us as citizens and being able to protect our First Amendment rights, and so that gave me a lot of confidence, even in spite of what's happening national-wide with the distrust of black. What it seems to, you've heard this, the black versus blue. I didn't feel like that was going to be the case in this situation. They asked to march with us. They asked to be a part, and they wanted to make sure it was safe and it was appropriate, and that they respected both the marchers, the protesters, as well as protected the local community. And they went up above and beyond for sure, in order to make sure all of those things happen and more, even things that you guys didn't get to see. We've even had an after action meeting after protest review
really?
with them last Friday. Yeah. It was a week ago. And so we learned a little more about what they did in order to make things better. And so I was pleased and happy to have them supportive. And I think that's why it went well. That's why it was so successful.
And then for me, Cole, not to cut you off.
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
I told Alex, I told Jamaica, you know, everybody that was part of us, Miss Towns, everybody. That was like the most powerful meeting I've ever been to in my life. Like, obviously you grew up, or I grew up, we feared the police, right? Like, if they get behind my mom while she's driving and she yells, "Everybody shut up." I'm like, wait, if we talk and get pulled over? Like, I'm confused. You know, like, shut up. You know, but sure. It's like, you always have this nervous feeling around the police, you know? But as I got older, as I learned to love people for who they were instead of like what I thought they were, I learned that they're human just like us, right? Like,
exactly.
They're brave men that go to you know, work every day, not knowing if they'll come home that day, you know. So it was amazing. Like Chief Harris, Dan Harris, he's been phenomenal. He actually like, I train at the park out here, JC Park. He pulled up this morning and just hopped out his truck and was like, "Hey man, how you doing? Everything good?" Just like, I didn't ask him to be there. He didn't tell me he was coming.
It's really cool.
High-fiving the kids, like, knowing that we can work together and help each other. That's the change we need.
Definitely. I think it's important to stress during this time that it isn't that these protests are trying to put Black lives on a pedestal. It's about bringing you guys up to where you should have been and making that equality there, and really just being humans together and having relationships with each other. So that, I'm really happy to hear that you had that experience. Definitely. All right, now how did you guys, so I went through the comments of a lot of the protest pictures and the posts about the protests, and how did y'all feel about the response in the town by the locals? How did y'all feel about that? How'd you respond?
Oh man, I told my mom to get off Facebook because she was getting pretty worried.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I put it on one of the updates. what we're trying to stress, and kind of my goal through this whole thing is there's three things: there's peace, love, and equality.
Mhm.
And that that's unfortunately a lot of the locals were not thinking that, but
Right. There was definitely a lot of
that,
negativity on social
yeah, for
media.
sure. And on that was just for me. I was trying to like just calm everybody down, but that's like the basis of the whole thing. As far as like the negative comments, I mean, it was disappointing to me because I know a lot of people making the negative comments like know me personally, and I
Wow.
didn't trust me to kind of have a peaceful protest. And like I was the leader and my name was on
Right.
it, so if it would
Right.
go bad, like it would be horrible for my reputation. So like, why would I not try to make it as
Right.
peaceful and as good as it needed to be? Um,
You definitely put your reputation up for that, and up
mhm.
for a lot of the negativity, and you were prepared for that. But I
Yeah, I mean, and another thing is a bunch of people were saying like racism isn't a problem in Stephenville, so why
Mm.
are we even having this? First of all, that's kind of like racial in itself, I feel like.
Yes, there are
But
definitely
another
different
thing,
experiences.
I think that for me, and I don't know about you guys, but for me, I wasn't scared of anyone from out of town. I was afraid of the locals. And I think that that should speak volumes about where Stephenville is. Like, I didn't fear anyone coming from Dallas and from,
Yeah.
like, apparently there's people coming from Del Rio, Dallas, and Austin, like, whatever. But I didn't fear any of those people. I feared the locals.
Right. And Stephenville's a
And
very small town with certain belief systems that it's not very big.
yes,
That's all I can
so
say.
that's just like, that was my thing. Like, I saw a bunch of people that I knew posting very hateful things. They wanted to run us over. They were locked and loaded.
Mm.
And all those people from Stephenville, like that I saw, or they live in the area. So I was scared of the locals.
Mm.
But thank goodness, like as of now, like after the event has happened, I think the reaction has been overwhelmingly positive.
Mm-hmm.
That's just what I've gotten from the
Right.
whole thing.
Yeah, Cole. So I probably like Alex and Stavia on both. Their phone or social media inboxes were probably super busy with
Yeah.
overwhelming support from people. I like both of them. I'm sure I had several Facebook requests for friend requests and things of that nature. So as Alex worried about the locals, I can say I was worried as well in that regard too. There are some really great people in Stephenville, but there are still people who still have that overwhelming belief of white privilege or nationality or superiority, and may not be their biases haven't had to be checked. And so I was a little nervous, but I was very appreciative of the people who really got involved, and really kudos to folks at Tarleton. That's a shameless plug to Tarleton, but I know a lot of Tarleton folks who were staff or employees or whatever their role was, and they're also Stephenville citizens. They came out and they were in full fledged and support, and I got a lot of messages, emails, and Facebook from those type of people.
Yes, that's amazing.
Lastly, as it got closer, I really wasn't scared of I told Reggie, Alex, all the law enforcement this the day before. I said I'm really not scared to get hurt if I'm doing what's right. Doesn't like that doesn't fear me. But what I was scared of is like my wife. Like I have a wife. Reggie has kids.
Right.
Right. Alex has a family that's been in Stephenville for about 30 years or more. Right. Like we have family. Like this is bigger than us. So
Definitely.
Reggie posted something the night before, Cole, and it calmed me down. He said, "It's just a short version or is it a little take of what he said? He said, "Understand this, there are no troublemakers leading this protest. Only citizens who attend your churches, people who may have attended school with your kids, men and women and children of parents that taught and coach your children, folks who have invested in the community, law enforcement officers who believe this is the right thing to do, local educators, etc." He was basically saying that's not a rowdy crew, right? Like, we don't have anybody coming in with like a violent mindset. Like, Alex didn't want to fight. I didn't want to fight. Reggie didn't want to fight. We didn't want to break buildings down. It was like, our goal was simply to get people to understand that we're all human, right? Like the same rights that, right, the dominant culture has, we need them, you know, like we're all the same. So
Right.
Reggie posted that. I was like, I just took a deep breath. I was like, let's go. Like, they gave me that boost that I needed.
That is great. That's incredible. It's such a good idea to put people in a mindset of like, oh, this could actually be someone I know, because so many people are like, well, this doesn't affect me, so why should I go? Or I shouldn't step into this problem because like I'm not a part of that community. It's important to know that we're all human beings and we all need to support other human beings.
Cole, it's as I put that out there, I was thinking through, and then I know we can keep moving, and I don't want to steal a lot of the time, but my point of that was that Alex, for instance, his parents both are educators. They have impacted pretty much every kid has come through, been impacted by them, white, black, Hispanic, Asian, whatever culture. Savion has coached so many kids of all races and ethnicities. Every day he's out there, and I work at the university. Plus, I've coached kids in this community since I was 25, so 17 years. And so it is just unbelievable that people could think that, you know, I just wanted to call them that your kids have probably already been impacted and influenced by Alex Jimenez, who coaches kids as well, or his parents who coaches kids, teachers and Savion who coach. Your kids have already been influenced, and the society has already been influenced by these individuals, and we're here to make it better.
Right.
We're not.
There needs to be a level of trust there.
Sure. Yeah. So.
All right. So stepping away from specifically Stephenville protests, what is it like being a person of color here in a small town like Stephenville, just in general?
So I'll answer first. I know, Alex, you grew up here, but I've been here the shortest amount of time. Like, I came in 2011 to play football, Cole, so graduated in 2015, went home, came back, got my master's, went home, came back, started a business. So I think Reggie has about 20 years on me in Stephenville. I think Alex has his whole life on me. But for me, like, I've never dealt with verbal racism hands-on, you know?
Obviously, right, that overt thing we're talking about.
Right? Obviously, you get looked at different, and you're always like a bean in a bowl of rice. I always say that. But anyways, it's always like, it's weird, it's awkward when you're around that kind of stuff. And to me, like, looks, I said this at the protest, like, looks, they don't faze me. Like anybody like chatting on the side doesn't faze me. So I know Reggie, I think he said Alex, they've dealt with it here, so I'll let them talk about that more. But for me, it's like, it's just, I haven't been in that situation yet. Will it come? I hope not. But if it does, I'm pretty well prepared for it. But for me, it's just
trying to keep a cool head, basically.
That's it.
So on a personal level, you see it. Of course, I'm in a interracial relationship. So you'll get a little bit uncomfortable, even as, you know, you would think, and I hear this all the time, that even as a professor, you earn a certain level of respect and you earn a certain level of income, but there's certain things places that my wife and I, we just don't go.
Really?
And we just don't go, like, as far as a restaurant, for instance. It's not any restaurant in particular, but if you see these great hole in the walls, these little dives, if I don't know much about it, we just don't go because we don't feel comfortable. And so those things still exist in Stephenville, even though that you could say, people can't believe that when I tell them that, Like you're Reggie Hall, you're a professor. I'm still black, and I wear that first, and that's what people who don't know me see me as first. They don't know what I do. They don't know who I am. They don't know my education, but they do know what I look like, and so you get some kind of uncomfortable looks, and so those things still exist. And so you're always mindful, as I mentioned to the law enforcement folks. I wake up every morning, and I'm mindful that I'm a black guy in Stephenville, Texas, and in the United States, period. I think about that consciously, and that's the difference between being a black guy and understanding that, and when we talk about white, not because white people are bad, but the system is built. This system is built and predicated for whites, and so when they wake up, you don't think about being white. You don't even have to acknowledge that.
Exactly.
So yeah, it exists, and it's not a knock, and it's not a knock on white people. It's the reality. So anyway,
I think it almost goes back to that kind of the toxicity of the you don't see color language, or like that idea that, well, I don't care what color your skin is. Well, okay, but there are different things that affect people of color. There are different things that affect indigenous people. There are different things that affect black people. There are different things that affect Hispanic people. Like, there are differences that you have to acknowledge, even though me, for example, as white, I don't have to think about wearing my skin color everywhere and figuring out, did that person look at me because I have a certain skin color? I mean, I have other things, but it's, you definitely have to think about where other people are sitting and what other people experience every day. So
great.
Definitely. Yeah, I know for me, it's just like there's always kind of a little sense of like discomfort. Like when you're out, you get the looks and you're just like, it's just weird. Like when people are just like staring at you, looking at you, you're like, dude, like, what are you looking at? It's
right.
I don't want to say, it's just annoying. It's uncomfortable. And you can't do anything about it because, you just can't. It's just the way
it's not something you can, it's not clothes you can take off, or
yeah.
A t-shirt you can stop wearing. It's
And then if, say, like, for example, say like I've had, a couple of difficult experiences with like a white male or something like that. Well, I don't know that white male specifically. So anytime that I get around like a white male or something like that, it's just like, oh crap, maybe this is the guy that did this to me, or like, it's just a level of like discomfort. And
there's a level of trauma there that is just constantly has you on your toes, basically.
Yeah, you always have to be very, very mindful of your surroundings, and it's I mean, it's just something that we have to deal with. It's, I think Reggie was saying it good. It's not a knock on any type of people. It's just something that we have to deal with that maybe white people don't necessarily have to deal with all the time.
Right. So many people are kind of shocked to find out that there are some issues like this still happening, like racism, for example. People think that it's ended due to segregation ending, and they're like, why is this still happening? I didn't think this was still happening in the United States. How do y'all respond to that?
Well, I'll initiate that, and I just mentioned that. I get that all the time. We get that. Does it still exist? And yes, the answer is you have to provide a little bit of education, and it's not really, shouldn't be on us to provide the education. The reality, I mean, it's the things exist. It's a systematic approach. You look, like I mentioned, education. You can go to graduation rates. You can look at the disparity between, especially African American boys, and how they're treated in the education system. Often either put into special education classes. They're suspended at a much higher rate. You look, and Hispanic males are right into those categories, and there's a great disparity. And the question I always ask folks is like, do you really believe that blacks and Hispanics are inferior to like a black male and a white male? Are they inferior? Right? Because they shouldn't be if we're talking about on just a neutral platform, or are they inferior? But why is there a greater disparity between the graduation rates and the expulsion rates and the wealth gap? Why do they exist? Well, if there's no real answer, if you go to meritocracy, because if I work hard, that's bull. And so those are the things that we have to look at to say, well, maybe there is something that exists, and just being openly honest about those things. But it makes people uncomfortable. There's a reason that it exists, and we can go into it's about power, and it's about advancement and wealth opportunities. But yeah, it exists. And so I probably have digressed far off of your question,
no, okay.
but
I like to hear your thoughts on it. So
yeah, so sorry. I'm passionate about those things because
of course
I get those questions even from people with you can't even excuse people with PhDs, because I still get those questions. I still get the comments by if there's a black person who's hired on at Charlton or anywhere, and they will say, or Hispanic, and he got the job because he's black, or he got the job because he's Hispanic or she. And I'm thinking, did you understand what you just said? You're saying that's the only reason. And I have problems with that. And I sometimes have to take that. I have to take that because it would take too long to educate someone on that whole process. But yeah, it's still uncomfortable.
Right. It's how do y'all feel about people saying that they don't feel like racism still exists in America? Did y'all want to take that one, or do we want to move on?
I'll go first, Alex.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's just me. I keep saying the same thing. Cole, I feel like it started a little over 400 years ago, right? I feel like it's always been there. We all know it, right? Our ancestors knew it. All these older generations knew it. I tell Lindsay all the time, it'll be here long before or long after we die, you know? And that's whether, it doesn't matter if we all, right, we're the same color, you know? I joke often and say, like, we'll find something else to be mad about. Like, oh, his nose is bigger than mine, or he has more hair. Like, it's like, it's just literally like humans, like, something got messed up. And you can go biblical and say Adam and Eve and all that, but something got, like, messed up to where we just wanted to hate each other, you know? And
it's the emotions that they're always heightened. There's always something we want to fight for or fight against,
like Reggie said, like
people
just in the job force, in the career world, right? Like, I'm an entrepreneur, so I do research a lot of billionaires, a lot of millionaires, a lot of philanthropists. Like, I research a lot of stuff. I probably see like 5 African American men to every 100 white men, you know? Like, there's something, obviously, if that doesn't tell you something, like, I don't know what will, because I've met a lot of smart African American men. I've met a lot of smart Caucasian men, right? Like, it's a gap, and we all know it. And our job is just to be a small part, and hopefully that trickles down to the next generation.
Yeah, like, we can't say there isn't racism systematically or overt, even in the United States. If we look at the differences, the disparities, that there has to be a reason for this, right? It can't just be, well, that's just how it happens. There has to be some sort of policy or something, even ingrained as a social norm in the way we're raised, especially in the South. So, Alex, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of just bounce off what Reggie was saying. It's still, I mean, it exists. I don't understand, you know, that. I don't know why people say that it doesn't exist anymore. It absolutely does. Another thing is, even if you accept the argument that it doesn't exist, which I think we all agree that it does still exist, those racist policies in the systematic laws that existed like in the 1950s
Mm-hmm.
and up, you know, into like the 70s or so, like in that civil rights movement, those are still like the effects of that still linger today. Redlining, if we know what redlining is, like African Americans could not get mortgages for houses, and that was what, in the 50s. That those created those neighborhoods that are super impoverished, super like high crime, high violence. That's a product of redlining. Even those neighborhoods today are a product of redlining. Those people that moved to inner city Chicago in the 1950s still live there, and those communities are still just ravaged by the effects of those policies. I mean, even the prison system, like
Definitely.
13th Amendment has, you know, it abolished slavery and involuntary servitude except for the punishment of crime. Well, African Americans are incarcerated at a much, much higher clip than white people and even Hispanics. I mean, those policies still exist. Not okay, the 13th Amendment still exists. Redlining doesn't, but the effects of redlining and like
Still
policies still linger. And it's so difficult to overturn that because it did so much damage. It did so much damage to those communities. It's going to take a long time to overturn that. But yeah, and then, you know, and then just attitudes towards people, you know, some people are changing on the good side or on the correct side, if you will. But I mean, there's still other people that will never, you know, look at me or Savion or Reggie the same way they look at someone else that's their color. I mean, it's just the fact of it. So it's still definitely around.
There's definitely a lot of internalized racism, I think. There are, of course, the policies, which I recently watched a documentary on Netflix, if you can imagine that, called 13, about the 13th Amendment, and I'm really interested in going into that. I have a possible guest for an episode about that one too later on. But there's, especially in the South, you're raised a certain way, and then I feel like there are internalized racist comments or belief systems that you think or whatever, that without realizing it until someone or you hear something that makes you question it, right? Why am I thinking this way? Or why is it that I was raised this way? Why have I never seen people of color in my high school? Or why do I only see a few people of color in my high school? Why don't I have any people of color friends? Is that something that I need to change? And I think having you guys on this episode and having a podcast like this helps people in that regard. To try to question what their belief system is or what they've always thought. Definitely. All right. So we did talk about systematic racism a little bit, and we talked about how racism is still manifesting to this day. How do we see that in the United States? And we can talk about law enforcement. We can talk about the prison system. You mentioned that a little bit. But I guess we can be more specific to law enforcement. How do we see that manifest there?
Well, I think on that documentary you just watched, 13th, there's like a statistic. So if you just think the racism, like you associate, if you see a person of color, you think that they're a troublemaker, basically. Like that's kind of like the stereotype.
Right.
And in that documentary, I think it was like 80 something % of blacks that are stopped without cause, and they're searched without they're stopped and searched for no reason at a way higher clip, and then they are not nothing they don't have anything on them, like they don't get in trouble for it, but they are still stopped and searched just because of that racial mindset of, oh, this guy is a person of color, he looks like a troublemaker. you can just you know, if you guys are familiar with like the Trayvon Martin incident, the George Zimmerman, what did he say like to the dispatcher? He's like, these a-holes always get away, or something. He said something like that. Like, what does that have to do anything with Trayvon Martin? He's not referring to anything other than than Trayvon's skin color, and we saw what happened with that. And I know George Zimmerman wasn't a law enforcement officer, but I mean, it's just a bunch of things like the police brutality against blacks. Like, there was someone killed in Tulsa, like in 2016, and they had like a helicopter flying around, and from like 1,000 feet in the air, the guy looks down and sees a black man and is like, that guy looks like a troublemaker. He literally said that. And like, how does he look like a troublemaker from that far away? Like, you just you don't know. That's how like that racist racial attitude against blacks, thinking that people of color, totally, like, you think they're troublemakers just because of the color of their skin. You're more uncertain about them. And that's how it manifests in law enforcement, I feel like.
Mm-hmm. You take what's been ingrained as well as what the system was made up.
For sure.
Dr. Hall, Savion, did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just continue. Alex articulated his point very well. And you look at the complexion color. I'm a very dark complected African American, and Savion as well. I think the darker complected, the more you're going to get seen as a troublemaker. Here, give you a quick example of this, of these things that happen, and it didn't. Nothing ever happened to it, but there was a burglary, a robbery of a Tanglewood pharmacy not too long ago, maybe a couple years ago. And I was on my way to work, but I was in workout clothes because I was going to go to the gym first. And so I kept seeing a helicopter circling by our neighborhood. I didn't know what was going on, but my wife, as I'm taking out the trash and getting ready to go to work, she comes outside and she said, hey, there was a burglary. You need to be aware. And that's why the helicopter's searching. And they were searching actually for an African-American man. And I think the description was shorts and some type of shirt. And I'm walking around, and I think it was the exact same color I happened to have on. And I walk around, I'm fine. And I thought about it, and I thought, you know what? I am not fine. So I went back in and changed clothes and made sure I put on something that was different, because I don't know. I don't know. Well, I do know how society views African Americans, and oftentimes it's very same size. We're all bad. And so, I even me being, living in the neighborhood I lived in, I went back in and changed clothes just because of that perception that I know still exists in the minds, not just the people in Stevensville, but it can be a nationwide deal. Being black is bad oftentimes, and we have to get better at ridding those stereotypes that black men are scary and they're harmful. They're going to rape your women, and they're going to rob they're going to rob your homes. That none of those aren't true. Those are fallacies that we've interpreted to be the reality, and we perpetuate that into reality. And you see these law enforcement, many times they are very fearful when they see African American male, and the bigger, the blacker, the worse, the more dangerous they are.
Absolutely. Then lastly, I'll tell y'all a quick story. So like, from what we see a lot of men that deal with it. And obviously we can bring up Sandra Bland, names like that. So my wife, we met here at Tarleton. She played here for 2 years. Then she transferred to a school in Oklahoma, and I stayed here, right? She was like maybe 2 or 3 white girls on the all-black team, Mm-hmm. She was one of the only ones that had a vehicle to get her teammates around for food, pharmacy, anything like that. So one night, her and her friend one night her friend that had a car drove Lindsay to like a store or something, and they got pulled over by the police. Mm-hmm. And her friend she wasn't fully black, but she was mixed, right? Darker complexion. Right. She was driving, and when the cop pulled them over, the driver, which was the mixed girl, she said, "What did you put me over for?" And the cop had said, "We had a call about a suspicious blue car in the area, Lindsay interrupted that conversation, and Lindsay told the cop, "But her car is silver. Why did you pull her over?" Right? And
Yeah.
I never knew this until this girl texted Lindsay like 2 weeks ago, or when we were in the heat of this police
Right. All of
brutality.
the.
Yeah. And the girl said, "Lindsay, I just thank you for that day. Like, I looked at him in the eyes. If you could have saw his facial expression, like you really like, I don't know what would happen, but your voice just did something." When I read that text, it gave me like chills. I'm like, so I'm the black guy, right? But my wife,
Right.
she has been like front line with it. I'm like, man, maybe you should go talk. That's what I told Lindsay. But it's just stuff like that. It's real. Like,
Right.
man.
I mean, there are plenty of videos and accounts of Black individuals saying one thing and then just people not hearing, and then we have white allies saying the same thing and they're like, oh, I see. And that just shows that there's a disparity here,
For sure.
that there's some reason that you can listen to something a white person says, but the same thing from a Black person is just not heard. And that's definitely an issue.
And for you to say that, like, that's huge. Like,
All right. Since we are talking about law enforcement, and of course, all the protests are related to law enforcement and their tactics and arrests and all of that. The acronym ACAB has come up a lot during protests. Some people are getting it kind of confused, thinking it means all cops are bad. A lot of people have said that, but it does have the original meaning as all cops are bastards. I've heard a few accounts of exactly what this is like associated with, as in like a bastardized system, but how do you guys feel about this particular term being used, and do you agree with it? Are you indifferent on it? What do you guys think?
I wouldn't agree with that at all. Even if it's part of a quote unquote bastardized system, you know what it's kind of getting at, and I don't agree with that at all. I think it would be with the men that we've met with and built a pretty good relationship with. I think it's extremely disrespectful to them. I think they're great people. The police officers that we've met with. I don't think it's ever good to just like group a certain type of person or people
Together,
into
right.
one, together like that. I don't think it's good at all, because then it just, if you think one cop is bad, it encourages like stereotypes and hate and I from the personal experience that I've had in the past few weeks with the police department of Stephenville, I think Stephenville is very, very lucky to have the people that they have in charge of that police department. So no, I don't agree with that at all, and hope that they come up with a different meaning. I've never heard of that, by the way. That's the first
really?
time.
Okay.
Yeah,
I've seen it
they come up
around
with
media, like posters and stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to bring it up, see what y'all thought about it.
Yeah, no, that's great to bring to the attention. But
Yeah.
I would probably, based on our experience, I know I do have friends who are Black, who are police officers, and a couple, all three of them actually are in the Dallas area. I think Grapevine and both the other two work for Dallas Police Department, and for me to sweep them to paint that picture for all cops would be inappropriate. It's the same thing that people would do what we're doing with African Americans and males, and so I think that's unfair. Is the system bad and some of the practices bad? I think that's where the change has to happen. They've talked about defund the police. I haven't read enough to know about that, but that doesn't seem like maybe the right approach. Again, I'd have to do my homework to figure out what that really means. But I do know there needs to be some real hard changes, some systematic changes, better training for those, more accountability, because I think that's where people go crazy. That's where we see the riots and whatnot. And that's why people are perplexed with with these things that happen, it's not necessarily just the incident alone. The incident alone is bad in itself, right? To see a African American male die in custody, but then we've had incidents over the last several years. You can go back 400 years, but let's talk very recent, to watch them die in police custody, and then the result is those police officers are acquitted. That's the challenge, right? So you got to couple those things. We look at it as one incident, but we're coupling. They're not culpable for whatever they're doing, and so that's why you have the people who feel like they have no voice anymore. The people who are educated or want to be educated and want to do it in a peaceful way, we organize protests and do things what I would consider the ideal and the right way. And those who feel like they're voiceless for whatever reason they may have come to, then they riot, and that may be the tactic that they take. So,
so a lot like Reggie and a lot like Alex, I do think it's unfair to label all cops bastards in that term, right? They're not all bad, right? Some of my best friends are actually cops, and like Reggie said, like it is bad, right? If there's bad people, there's bad cops, right? But so like just call them that because of something that has been going on, it's extremely unfair. And I also thought about this while y'all both were talking. Like we're just talking like I remember Alex when we first got there. Alex spoke first. He said Emmett Till, Trayvon Martin. He was just naming everybody, right? Like it's kind of sad because as he was naming them, I was like, remember, I was like, man, he's right. Like it happened when I was that age. That happened. You can just remember. Like I wasn't even alive with Rodney King, but I remember that story well. And imagine Cole, Alex, Reggie, imagine everything we don't see, right? What wasn't recorded or what didn't make the news or what didn't make the media, like white or black, like it's something has to change.
Definitely. And I know there have been so many lives lost since then, since even May 25th, on both sides. And it's just, I'm glad to hear y'all's opinion on that, because honestly, as someone who wants to be an ally for different groups of people, I really have to step back and see what this group is saying. What do you guys want from allies? And it's good to know that some things like this just aren't what you all are looking for. This is not what it's really meant to be. We don't want to group people together and assign things to them. It's about each individual human being. And there are plenty of cops out there who have started to kneel with protesters or have marched with the protesters, like in Stephenville. And of course, there have been people who've taken advantage of the protests on the same side. So
another compliment to the Stephenville authorities, right? The local enforcement, they're phenomenal with us because, like, when we meet, it's like everything, like phones are out the window. Like we're just so engaged and we're connecting. Like, I was talking to my wife and her sister last night. Like the thing that always gets messed up is some people, they don't listen to like hear, right? They don't listen to understand. They just listen to talk. They're just ready to say their 2 cents. But when Alex, Reggie, me, Chief Harris, Halsey, all of us were sitting down, like we're so locked in. It's like effective communication, right? We want to know each other. We want to know what we do over here and what they do. And like we have a group text. We have a group text with like 12 people in it right now. And we just send each other podcasts, news articles. Like they send how they feel. We send how we feel. Happy birthday to Alex last week. It's like we're a team just trying to like show people that it can't happen. So big kudos to Stephenville Police and this community.
Right. We talked a little bit about how officers and law enforcement have started taking a stand against this kind of behavior and banning certain techniques and updating use of force rules and stuff. And in Dr. Reggie Hall, you talked about the defunding a little bit. That's more research based. I just recently started hearing about that, and I don't know too much about it either, so I don't think we'll touch on that as much. But what do you think are some steps that we should take as a nation, as a state, even as a local community to try to fix this problem?
I can take that. I think the first test or the first thing that we need to do is have better training and longer training and more effective training for police officers.
It's definitely surprising to hear, because obviously I have some cops in my extended family, but I don't know too much about the system in which they educate themselves to be officers. But it's very short, and surprising how short it is and what the requirements are. And my significant other's dad is a police officer, and just hearing stories about other officers and how they got through training by doing certain things that weren't right, and it's crazy.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I mean, definitely, because I would say that, some police officers are not like emotionally adept to being a police officer because it takes a lot, but you can't have, it's you can't just have like a short fuse on. I saw a video the other day where an officer just pulled a gun on a guy, and he said that he had a gun on him, but it was at a traffic stop, and his hands were like on the steering wheel, like he wasn't doing anything, and she just pulled a gun on him. Some like things like that, maybe better training. I don't know. I'm sure the police themselves will know how to go through better training, but better training in general. And then I think like bridging the gap, like more community events that gets like the conversation started. I think at our after action meeting, something that I've kind of thought for a while, but I'm not Black, so I couldn't really attest to it. But something that came up during our meeting on Friday was that law enforcement and the African American community is like actually extremely similar, like how they feel. They're scared walking down the street, things like that. They're pretty similar. So getting that conversation started, like bridging that gap, more personal relationships, personal communication with law enforcement, I think would go a long way for both sides. Like, say a school in Dallas, for example, like get Dallas PD into those schools, and like it doesn't have to be anything official. Like just have an officer like go eat lunch with a group of kids maybe, and like build like that kind of connection. It doesn't have to be anything that big, but build that connection, build that trust, and a little bit at a time, maybe it'll go a long way.
Definitely building those relationships, and that's what this podcast is really trying to help do. And I think that's very important, building that communication, because even as someone who's never had any issues with law enforcement, I'm still honestly scared because of their authority, and there are plenty of people out there who have even more reason to be scared of just being pulled over for a traffic stop or something. So to build that relationship is very important. Make that human connection, definitely.
So Cole, I'll keep my response short and sweet. When we met the first time with the law enforcement, as we kept going on in the conversation, I kept thinking, it's because like I love to motivate people. Like I actually want to be a motivational speaker one day. So I'm big with like mental health and life coaching and stuff like that. So I was like, so y'all are all police, right? You keep telling us you've been doing it for 20 years, 30 years, right? All these years. There's no way, and if you are, I totally commend you, but there's no way you're the same, like that same passion, right? You've been doing the same thing over and over, year, but like that same passion when you took the job at 20 or 21, but now you're mid 40s, early 50s. You probably had some wear and tear, right? Maybe a divorce, maybe a car wreck, maybe lost a kid, maybe couldn't pay bills, bankruptcy, all that. Like that weighs down on people. So like, I'm thinking like, do y'all do any like mental health training, right? Like, do y'all exercise often? Like, do you have a area in your station where you can just like shut the world off for a minute and just like work on your physical fitness or your mental fitness, and like, 'cause I think that does play a huge role in. But one of the cops made a good point. They told us, man, if you do research, it shows, or statistics show that cops, their life expect, or I hate that word. Dr. Hall, help me.
Life expectancy.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's only like mid-50s. They have heart attacks. They have strokes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I feel like, right, you're stressed out. You're tired. You can't shut your brain off. Like, they
Lots
need
of
people
trauma.
to help them. Like, I even joked with them. I was like, I would come in for free and just like talk to y'all like once a week or twice a month. Like, just get to know you all and like let you share your true feelings with me. And I feel like I'm not gonna say it's 100% of the reasons that people have died or police brutality, but I think that plays a little role. Like, right? That's just my thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I'm gonna wrap it up with just one more question for you guys, okay? What do you want allies to hear? For people, listeners that are looking for what can I do to help? What are y'all looking for? Like, what should we do to help you guys?
That's a great question. You always ask, what solution-wise, and I think getting engaged in things that you've done, like Cole, having a podcast and having this conversation, being a part of the protest. As I said, and I encourage people, you can no longer allow ignorance to be your excuse, because there's so many resources out there, and that doesn't mean calling your best Black friend, or that could be part of it, but getting on the internet, reading the books, the audio books, going to the training. It's a continual process for Blacks, for whites, but when you're on those juror systems and making those laws and voting for laws, be mindful of not just the impact it will have directly, but also the way it indirectly impacts the people of color. So it's a full process of, and it's real work. As I had the privilege of talking to a couple of the high school coaches, Alex and I, and I told them, I said, you want to make sure that you have full support of your administrators, because at the end of the day, this real work of diversity and training people on understanding diversity and Black Lives Matter, it's real work, because it's challenging. It's always challenging to go from your comfort zone to then now become uncomfortable, because these topics are sensitive. And anytime it's real work, it's like we're taking an SW fitness workout. It's real work. Right. And at the end of the day, there's going to be some sweat. There's going to be some mental sweat that goes out as well. And so you have to be up for the challenge. Not you, Cole, personally, but you have to be up for that challenge, that it's going to make you feel uncomfortable. It's not going to be fun. But at the end of the day, if you really want your kids, your family, your peers to have a better America, a better whatever it is, then get to it. So ignorance is not an excuse. It's an opportunity for you to grow as a person. And so the last thing I'll say is that I thought this was one of the most profound statements that was made in that book that I was mentioning with White Fragility. She asked the question, is like, basically, if the absence of diversity in your life, we don't ever think about, in the absence of diversity, would our life be okay? And for many white people in America, the absence of not having really strong relationships with people of different colors, their life would still go and still be fine. And that's kind of sad to think about that. And our life is probably very unlikely that we're going to run into a society where we don't have white people or Hispanic friends, and people of color enrich my life by having Coles, by having my wife who's white in her family. It enriched my life by having Alex Jimenez, by having different folks like that in my life. My life is better, but that may not occur and be the case for many white people in America. So I know I talked a lot, but that's just, to me, that just stuck in my head, that there's people who can go through life and be okay and excel, not just not be okay. They can go through graduate school, be a CEO of a company. That's the example. You can be a CEO of a large firm but never really truly engage with another person of color or have a really strong relationship. That's sad, because I think you look at that company, it's probably highly diverse in regards to the consumer base and the employee base, but the CEO could actually make it and be fine and never really interact with that group and understand that group.
Yeah. So I think it's about trying to see other people and see their experiences. And thank you so much for all of what you've talked about on here and what we can put out to the world, and hope this is the time of change, because it does feel like that 2020 has had its ups and downs.
Sure.
But I'm really hoping that this will spark a higher change than has been in the past. So I think I'm going to end it there, guys. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Cole.
Thank you, Cole, for having us.
All right, folks, thank you so much for listening. We talked a lot about different things and a lot of topics that can be kind of uncomfortable sometimes, but it's really important when you're building those connections with diverse people that you put yourself in their shoes and learn more about it. And that's what Dr. Hall was talking about. As an ally, we just got to keep educating ourselves and listening to people and seeing what they experience. There's plenty more topics to address, and we'll keep it coming on Making Space. If you want updates about the show, please make sure to follow and like us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at The Planet 100.7. That's the radio station we're based out of. And I will include some links in the description about different sources you guys can go to read up a little bit. For now, folks, be safe, and we'll see you next time.
This has been a Tarleton Radio Network podcast with production from AJ Heyer and Taylor Welch. Find more great shows by searching Tarleton Radio Network wherever you get your podcasts.